So I'll just start and you guys can just ask Dr. Walsh whatever question you would like. So Josh, we'll start with you.
Doctor, what is your reaction with this Pfizer vaccine possibly coming into fruition after their announcement this morning?
Well, it's certainly encouraging. It is obviously an interim analysis and very early results. We have not seen the data. We've seen what's been released, and so we don't have all the information. But certainly encouraging, and certainly in line with what we might have expected, given the immunogenicity of the vaccine.
When something like this comes about, what are the steps usually when a vaccine is being developed? What are some of the next steps that you can tell us about? They
often will do an interim analysis in certain situations. Not all, but they'll certainly be monitoring safety very carefully throughout the duration of a study. And any safety signals, for instance, would, if they were significant enough, the Data Safety Monitoring Board would look into that by unblinding the subjects to assess safety. As far as efficacy, though, many studies would not be unblinding at an interim basis. However, for the coronavirus vaccine studies, interim analyses are being done, and I think in large part because of the necessity to move as quickly as possible to a vaccine. And sometimes these are also done in studies where there might be concern that the vaccine is not working or perhaps is even having a detrimental effect, and they want to be sure that that's not the case. But in this current environment, all of the studies, as far as I know, will be looking at the data as they move along.
Thank you, Josh. Patrick?
Dr. Walsh, always good to see you and always good to talk to you. Basically, two things. This morning I heard a news report saying that the United States could see 10 million cases. It's expected to be announced today. Anything you can tell us that we haven't heard yet from that?
I don't believe so. It's very clear that across the country, the number of total cases across the country has increased. Locally in Rochester, we are also seeing that increase, and you've all been aware of that and reporting that. The exact reason why we're seeing that, anyone could list a few reasons. Schools being back in, being one, could potentially be a factor. It's hard to know. Fatigue from not being able to go out and go to restaurants and so forth, as well as social distancing and wearing masks could also be a factor that plays a role. And then lastly, we really don't know the epidemiology of this virus, but it certainly could be one that falls into a fall-winter pattern like many other respiratory viruses do. And so all three of these things could be contributing to that. In terms of the total numbers that will ultimately be seen, for instance, in this current increase, I really think the epidemiologists are much better at making estimates as to what that might be. A lot of it will have to do with can they reverse some of the issues that might be playing a role, such as lack of social distancing, wearing masks, washing hands, and being very careful.
And then my next question is, I'm getting ready to interview a gentleman who is part of the vaccine study. He received the Pfizer vaccine. He says he's walking proof that it works. I know you're here to talk about early results on the effectiveness of the vaccine. What can you say on that point?
Well, I think, first of all, none of the study subjects know whether they received the actual vaccine or not. I do want to certainly thank and compliment all of the subjects, not just in Rochester, but across the country, who were in the Pfizer vaccine, but also who are currently enrolling in the other vaccine studies that are active. It's quite clear we're going to need these other studies to be successful as well. And, none of them will know whether they received the vaccine or a placebo, but their participation is absolutely critical to successful control of this pandemic.
Okay, Andrew?
Hey, good morning, Dr. Walsh. Thanks for talking.
Can I just pipe in? Ann Falsey's on the phone, on the Skype too, so feel free to ask her questions since she worked on this as well.
Good morning, Dr. Falsey as well. Thank you both for doing this. I guess this is for either of you. The first question is, in layman's terms, people have been waiting for this good news about a vaccine, waiting and waiting. They see something like this today, a headline. What is the message about seeing that and being optimistic, but also still knowing that this doesn't mean we're close to tomorrow, this is going to be over? What should people's expectations be as they start to see these things we've been waiting for, these headlines come out? How close are we really? I know you probably can't say, but I guess what should people be gauging their expectations for when they see a headline like that?
The expectation should be that this is an interim report. And I think we all saw this on the news as well. The current guideline for safety analysis is requiring a longer period of time following the receipt of the second dose of the vaccine in order to feel comfortable with safety. Now that's 2 months of safety data, which is a good thing. But a final report, obviously an assessment will be made both on safety and efficacy as they go along. I would, and then the other issue has to do with the availability of a vaccine. It is very clear that even if this vaccine were pronounced to be 90% effective on January 1st, we will not be able to run off and get a vaccine. Not only is production an issue, but distribution with the Pfizer vaccine will be very difficult.
So can you hear me? Yeah. So I wanted to, I agree with everything Dr. Walsh just said. We need to be cautious, but I think it's actually reason for optimism that the vaccines will work. And I guess what I would say to the public is, maybe this is the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's even more reason to wear your masks and do social distancing, because I worry that fatigue sets in, pandemic fatigue. It's hopeless, we're never going to get out of this, and people develop a sort of feudalistic attitude. But I think vaccines are on the horizon. It's going to take a little while yet, but I think this is very encouraging news. I was very happy to hear it.
That is good to hear. Follow-up question too is your experience for both doctors with working on previous vaccines. How does this compare? How is this trickier? How is this better? Is there a way you can, I know maybe it's apples and oranges, but is there a way you can take perspective from things you've worked on in the past for other vaccines and sort of compare with this one?
My experience with previous vaccine studies that we've been involved with, as well as watched as they've come along over the years, over many years, are two things. One is in a sense, good luck that the basic science had really been laid and well established for what we needed in a vaccine prior to launching off on a vaccine trial. It absolutely is unusual to have a vaccine be effective first go round. I mean, it does happen, but so often you have a vaccine that is moderately effective, barely effective, suggestive that you might be getting there. To see something like this is unusual in the first go round. And the second issue is really the mobilization of the entire infectious disease community with one focus, really across not just the country, but the world, with a single focus. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before.
I guess we can go to Mallory. Do you have a question?
Yes. So I'm going to kind of go back a bit. You mentioned earlier about, the what's it called? Production of vaccine. And I was wondering, what is your capacity handling for demand of the vaccine? Like, how do you see your capacity for that?
Well, I think that we are unfortunately not the people in charge of capacity. I think it is one of the mandates of Operation Warp Speed, so that they could manufacture at risk before they even knew if a vaccine was effective. So manufacturing has been going on. Pfizer elected to operate outside Operation Warp Speed, but I don't know the details, but they have been working with the government to scale up production. There also are plans not only for production, but how to equitably and justly start distributing the vaccine when it will not be in, you can't just go down to the CVS and get the vaccine. There really has to be a sensible rollout to the highest risk individuals.
I think it's also, with specifics to the Pfizer vaccine, one of the distribution issues and administration issues is going to be the necessity, at least at this stage, to keep the vaccine, transport the vaccine at very cold temperatures. It's a minus 112 degrees Fahrenheit that the vaccine needs to be stored at this point. Whether they'll be able to modify that to be something that can be handled at a lower, or I should say higher temperature, we'll have to see. But that'll create some issues. Hospitals have these freezers, but physicians' offices do not. My guess would be that most pharmacies in your neighborhood do not. And so this will create a challenge that is certainly not insurmountable, but one that specifically with this vaccine needs to be addressed. And then the general distribution of vaccines is difficult. It's not so simple, as Dr. Falsey just pointed out.
Do you have a follow-up, Mallory?
Yes. So I guess, how will you address maybe public fears that people might have regarding the vaccine, and yeah.
Education. I think that unfortunately there's a fair amount of misinformation out there, and so we can address misinformation with good education. But with any new vaccine, when you can't say you have lots of experience, you can only hearken back to what we know about other vaccines. Ed?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. I mean, the history of vaccines has been generally, and not universally, but generally extraordinarily successful. The benefit of the vaccines that have been released over the years, over the many years of vaccines, and this is going back to the 1950s. The benefit has far outweighed any risks, and I think there's that history to rely on. It's no guarantee, of course, but I think this is important to recognize, and education will be important.
So just one final comment. A lot of the vaccine hesitancy in recent years has been because vaccines have been so successful that they have nearly eradicated the terrible diseases. And so, people don't understand the true impact of some of these infections. And they start fixating on, potential threats from a vaccine. I think with this pandemic, we can look around and see friends and family members who have been devastated. And so everything is risk benefit. So in addition to educating people about misinformation and the true side effects of vaccines, we can also ask them to think about risk benefit ratios, and that, with 100,000 cases a day and 1,000 deaths each day in the US, there's a significant risk to not getting vaccinated. So choosing to not accept a vaccine or not do anything is a decision, and that also carries a significant risk. So I'm going to have to drop off because we're vaccinating for a different trial. We won't talk about that. Okay, bye everybody.
Patty, you have a question for Dr. Walsh?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So I figured I'd come in at the end and throw a wet blanket over the whole thing. But based on what was just said about distribution issues, that this is interim, so this is early results, the markets have gone crazy over this and a new president today. How are we not getting ahead of ourselves with the fact that it was just, I just read the release, only I guess 94 people with COVID out of the 43,000. Explain how we need to maybe rein in the horses on this.
Excuse me. Well, I think that's what we were talking about early on, is that this is interim, and it's, what other people do with this kind of data often is out of proportion to, the facts that we have. It's encouraging. It's certainly not final, but it would be very discouraging if the interim analysis had suggested, a barely effective or minimally effective vaccine at this point. And I think what it says is that, and I think Anne touched on this before she had to drop off, if we can stall the epidemic, or the pandemic, I should say, long enough to bring a vaccine like this and like some of the others that are currently in trials through to their conclusion, where we are confident that they are effective and confident that they are safe. If we can just be patient enough to wait a bit, that it will be very, very gratifying. But it is preliminary, and what other people do with the data is not really in the control of those of us who are involved with this.
So the study, as I read, is still enrolling, still going to be moving forward. What's going to happen, do you think, if results don't stay as positive as they are? Is that possible? You've seen that in other trials, that it gets off to a great start, and then more and more people, more and more testing, this is where problems start to show up.
Well, right. There are several issues that you need to consider. Obviously, this is very early, so it's in those individuals who had received 2 doses and were out a little bit of time so that they could be assessed for infection rates. And as we go out further, some of the things that will be in play would be the durability of an effectiveness of a vaccine. How long will this vaccine be effective? We don't know. Is it going to be 2 months or 6 months or a year, or will it be lifetime? I mean, we don't know that information. And if it's, let's say, only 6 months, then as this trial goes on beyond the 6-month period, you might start to see, failures within the vaccine group. And so these are important, very important issues that we're hoping to be able to answer. Now, while waiting for those longer term analyses, you also have the issue of a pandemic that is very rapidly spreading. And so you weigh the balance between waiting and moving early. And those are decisions that are going to be made at very high levels by very smart people who will take all of this into consideration.
Thanks, Ed.
Hey, it's Seth Voorhees. How are you, Doctor?
Hi.
Hi. I believe that you pretty much answered most of the questions I had, but just I don't know if you can, if you have any, major concerns just about, once there is finally a vaccine. This is, and you did talk about the supply chain, but this is going to be a massive undertaking with something this large scale. Any particular concerns once we do get to that point?
Not really. I mean, it's going to take a huge effort. I certainly not insurmountable. The situation of having now, I might point out, and we'll have to see whether this bears out. If you look at the preliminary data in the laboratory, in animal studies, and in early phase 1 studies for other vaccines that are currently in testing, they all look very, very similar in terms of their immunogenicity, tolerance, etc. There are some, minor differences and so forth, but this would be very encouraging that not only this vaccine may work, but others as well. And that will help immensely in terms of supply and distribution. They'll all have somewhat different parameters of their ability to be moved about and administered and so forth. And the schedules are all a little different as well. Some are like this one. This is 3 weeks between doses. As people know, the AstraZeneca vaccine is a 1-month booster dose, whereas the Janssen vaccine is a single dose. So there's differences between these vaccines, but there's also a tremendous amount of similarity in terms of their immune responses that they've been seeing in the early phase 1 studies. So not only is this very encouraging for Pfizer, I think it's also very encouraging for the entire field, which will help tremendously in terms of distribution and availability.
I'll go next if nobody else is up. Dr. Walsh, can you give us a ballpark on when, given where we are now, when we're likely to see approval of this Pfizer vaccine? Are we talking December? Are we talking spring? Are we years away still?
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, the information that I have, unfortunately, is probably no better than what you're hearing on the news as well. This is they're talking about, if this interim analysis is at 2 months, sometime in December, we're going to have more data that if it is as encouraging and consistent with what we're seeing, at least what I'm hearing is that you may see emergency use authorization, perhaps as early as January or so. But again, that's I'm hearing it in the same place as you are.
You talked about this a little bit earlier as well, the idea that whoever's first to the market may not be the last. I think if my understanding of history is correct with the polio vaccine, we had the Salk vaccine, and then a few years later, the oral vaccine came out. Do you expect that we may see a similar thing where we have a vaccine available soon and something better comes beyond that? I guess my question is, it's important to keep participating in all of these other studies as well, and not put all our eggs in one basket.
Right. There are many reasons why we need to not shut down other studies and say, well, here we have an answer. One is just what you pointed out. Maybe there's something better. Most vaccines do go through an evolution, including this one could very well go through an evolution. Improvements, small tweaks, and so forth. As I pointed out before, we have early data saying 90% effective, but perhaps at 6 months it won't be quite as high, and there may be ways to modify the vaccination schedule in such a way that it stays at 90% for a longer period of time. So these are the kinds of things that could evolve. It is hard to, if this vaccine turns out to truly be 90% effective and fairly persistent in that degree of protection, it's going to be hard to believe that we'll have other vaccines that are more effective than that. I mean, that's really pushing up against some serious limitations. Measles vaccine is apparently 97% effective. It's our best vaccine we have in terms of preventing any infectious viral infection. So this is, in a sense, pushing up towards that level, which is certainly greater than what we've seen with flu vaccine. The closest we'd come with flu vaccine was in the live attenuated flu mist, which was introduced some time ago, and in the early studies in children. Was also in the 90s percentage effectiveness, and that was quite remarkable. We don't see that often.
Howard, do you want to ask a quick question and then we'll wrap up?
Thank you. I've got a few questions here. Let me scroll up to the top of my page. So I want to come back to the safety issue, Doctor. And I don't know if you saw 60 Minutes last night, the general in charge of the program for the government said the thing that keeps him up at night is people worrying about safety. One question I've had early on when I was reading about vaccines, I read that, one reason it takes so long to develop a vaccine is scientists want that 12-month to 18-month period to see any side effects. And so with rushing this through, is that any kind of concern? Is there something different about this vaccine or coronavirus that would suggest we don't need that long of a period to see how things are playing out?
In an ideal world, we would be looking at 12 months, 18 months, as you pointed out. Again, you're weighing, as Dr. Falsey pointed out before, you're really weighing a risk-benefit issue. We're looking at a pandemic that is, potentially going to result in, if left unchecked, hundreds of thousands of more deaths in the U.S. and certainly millions worldwide. And so you you try to make your best judgments as to what kind of side effects might you say be missing in a early decision to deploy a vaccine. If it's been 4 months or 5 months, that's when that's encompassing a period of time when you're generally going to see almost all of the side effects that might come from a vaccine of this type or of any type. But again, it's new, and if you wanted to be absolutely conservative and try to live out the pandemic by not leaving your house or having contact with others, that would be a position you if you wanted to have ultimate assurance that there are no side effects that could occur at a year or two, then that's what you'd have to do. So it's again, it's a cost-benefit assessment. Most vaccines that have side effects of significance will occur early on, and you'll see them, fairly shortly after the immunization schedule is completed.
Do you have a follow-up, Howard?
Yes, a follow-up on the distribution. I represent rural readership. Can we expect rural residents to, get distribution in the same sort of time frame as more densely populated areas, or is that going to be more of a logistic challenge, and we're going to have to expect to drive to those?
Well, it depends, I guess. So certainly, currently, if the Pfizer vaccine were deployed next week, as an example, it's theoretical because it won't be, but if it were to be, the issue would be shipping and storage at places where you can vaccinate. And as it was pointed out before, this is not going to be at pharmacies. Right now, as an example, at Rochester General Hospital, University of Rochester, we have plenty of -80, which is -112 Fahrenheit freezers that we can store vaccine in, and we can deploy a vaccine of this type from them. That would require people to come in. I know we didn't get into a discussion, I thought we were, but the deployment strategy, as we're going to be seeing come out, is going to be in various tiers of risk individuals. And, as we've all heard, for instance, healthcare, frontline healthcare providers are going to be high on that list. People who are elderly, people who are in high-risk populations, as we know them right now to be, are going to be prioritized. And if they're rural or if they're in the city, it really doesn't matter. But you're right; they'll have to they'll have to come in to a site like here, like in a city or at a major medical center. That does create some issues, for sure.
Okay, guys.
Okay,
Thank you.
I've got one more question.
Okay.
It's related to the epidemiology, and I was just thinking about this when you were talking about, the 2-month period, and also earlier you talked about we don't know, the warm weather versus cold weather effect. Any concern that 90% efficacy rate might be masked by most of these people getting the vaccine and living with it for a couple of months during warmer months?
I wouldn't even, that would have to take, give me a half hour to think that through. That's a complicated question to try to answer. So I'll say I can't answer it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Walsh. I'll let you get back to your work.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Veronica.